Hello, everyone. Welcome to Advocacy Arena, the place to bring awareness and solution oriented focus to important issues in our society. And today I am joined by Marc Janice, who is going to be sharing with us some things regarding uh, our Supreme Court and some other legal issues because Marc is a lawyer. So I want to give Marc an opportunity to introduce himself. Marc and I met virtually, actually, in Twitter Spaces and got to know him and his expertise. And I'm so excited to have him here with me today to share some of that with you. So, Marc, would you just like to introduce yourself, tell people what you do, what your background is a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of ask you some questions to get our conversation started.
So let me start with my background. Well, I'm the son of a civil rights lawyer who worked for 40 years in civil rights and employment discrimination based upon race. And I went to law school at a law school on the West Coast. My first foray into con law was constitutional law was my first con law class, where I had my first black male professor, and that made an impact on me. And I did what you call AmJuring, which is the American Jurisprudence Award. It means you get the top grade in the class in con law. I didn't think that anything of that at the time. It was kind of nice just to get the top grade in that class, just because I had a black professor. I didn't know that later in life, in Democracy First, all that knowledge that I thought I mastered would be tested. I later worked for, I did appearances for a lot of black lawyers in LA, including Johnny Cochran and Judge David Hereford, who actually was the judge on the People versus Daystar Peterson, otherwise known as Tory Lanez case. Um,
Okay.
and then I became a district attorney and tried several cases in domestic violence, general felonies, and then also gang violence up to and including murder. Then also, I did some civil litigation after that, and after trials and tribulations, got exhausted with that. Now I'm a adjunct professor teaching undergrad pre-law at a local college here in the South, and also I am in tech, and I do um, totally non-law related stuff in tech.
All right.
but
We
but
all need that.
but I love Democracy First because I was, it's an inclusive conversation that I was able to just like talk about things that I know about to inform people regarding the opinions they have, and arm them with constitutional material that reinforce some of our shared beliefs and values.
Absolutely. And when Marc is mentioning Democracy First is a Twitter space, basically a podcast because it's a recorded, um, it's audio. And it's a place that I created along with someone else. For a year, we had conversations around issues regarding our democracy. And Marc came into our community and he was able to share with us, give us some many great insights on legal cases that were coming up and just um, background on legal issues that we might be discussing because one of the topics that we discussed a lot in Democracy First was civil rights, which Marc, was able to give us some great scholarly background on how they came about. We, had history professors in there to give us a historical perspective, and Advocacy Arena it's a new podcast, and as I said, it's designed and was created actually before I started having those Democracy First conversations. The concept was created, but the content wasn't clarified until I started having those great conversations in Democracy First, because that's my passion. And I was able to find people like Mark, who had a lot of other expertise and passion, because Mark is very passionate about the law, and that was one of the things that drew me to him and kept me inviting him back to be a part of our conversation. And I wanted to get our conversation here today started talking about just some of the cases that are now, going before the Supreme Court, and the impact that they have on our democracy, and, some of our civil rights, things that we have really come to take for granted that are now in jeopardy. And you can dive in on any of them that you would like to, and we'll just go from there.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot of stuff going on in the Supreme Court, as we know.
Right?
And we've had a bunch of voting rights cases. So when we think about what's going on in the Supreme Court, we have a group of cases in different, I call them different cups of justice, right? We have some civil rights cases going on. We have some voting rights cases going on. And we have voting limits rights cases going on. One of which is Ardoin versus Robinson, which is a Louisiana case that's joined by several other states that talks about how voting districts are drawn in states. So that's
Is that the one where they ask the question about, what's black or who is black? Is
correct.
that the same case?
Yes,
Okay.
and oral arguments have not been set yet, but those are kind of some of the big cases that are going on. A lot of the cases that are going on right now center around, or at least have touched upon, the 14th Amendment and how this current court is interpreting the 14th Amendment. And so a lot of the common themes that you find me talking about are the arguments of originalism versus the 14th Amendment. The 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment were post Civil War amendments that were made to incorporate Black people, or former slaves, African American slaves, Negro slaves, into America and make them full citizens. So there's a lot of argument in some of these cases that are before us today that are centered around what is the 13th, well, is the 14th and 15th Amendment, are they colorblind or are they color conscious or color conscious? And there's a big difference between colorblind and color consciousness. Color consciousness doesn't mean it's based upon race. Color consciousness means that when they did it, they took into account race. And so, how do we interpret that over 150 years later? That's the argument that's being made before the Supreme Court on a lot of our major issues, including some of the voting rights cases too.
Okay. And the other case that recently passed this spring, um, Roe versus Wade. How do you see that passing? Like, do because it's kind of like the President Biden said, it's the first time that the Supreme Court actually made a ruling that actually took away a right. And how do you see the cases that are currently pending, these Reconstruction era rights, that we got, the amendments like the 13th and the 14th, the cases that are coming before them now? How do you see them going with the makeup that we currently have of the court? And maybe a little bit as to why they're even there, how we got there with these.
So the makeup of the court is important before even we talk about the
Okay.
issues
Okay.
of how they're ruling, because we already know how they were going to rule by the makeup of the court. And there's a whole separate conversation that actually you've brought up before about how we got here. Uh, and I don't want to. I want to stick to the makeup of the court because it's
Okay.
important to understand who these individuals are and what their focus is. So we have Clarence Thomas is the oldest member of the Supreme Court. Clarence has always had a problem with substantive due process, and when I say substantive due process, this is there's procedural due process Supreme Court cases, and there's substantive due process Supreme Court cases. Substantive due process is more like the things that are unenumerated in the Constitution, meaning they weren't really plainly stated in the original makeup of the Constitution, but they were found to be rights. Called they were among what the Griswold v. Connecticut court called a penumbra of rights. So I've never even heard penumbra used other than penumbra of rights in normal conversation. I might have been at a cocktail party and said, you're penumbrally beautiful or something like that. I probably haven't, but I'm just making a big joke. But nobody uses penumbra, right? So uh, one of the examples of a penumbra right is the right to privacy, which was found in Griswold v. Connecticut, which had to do with married couples contraception, that people have a right to do stuff in their own home and without governmental intervention as to what they do in their own home. And so what the Supreme Court there said, hey, look, we have the Fifth Amendment, we have the 14th Amendment, and what they kind of allude to is that and also the Fourth Amendment too. They allude to this thing that called privacy, right? You have a right to remain silent. Your private thoughts. You have to have a search warrant. The government has to have a search warrant to invade your space, your car, your home. So there's a right to privacy. So Clarence Thomas has had a problem with judge-made law. He calls it judge-made law. Now, with Clarence Thomas, there's Justice Alito, and there's Justice Gorsuch, and then there's Justice Kavanaugh, and there's
Hmm.
just Amy Coney Barrett. So they are along these lines of persons that don't like what they call judge-made law, and you will hear the terms when it comes to them of originalists or textualists, right? And then you have the makeup of the court. Then you have three other what they call liberal justices, Kagan, Justice Elena Kagan, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Justice Sonia Sotomayor, that are aligned with the what people call the left side of the Supreme Court, the non-conservative side. So we are not staged in a typical historical conservative versus liberal Supreme Court. We are staged in a court, and you have John Roberts in the middle, the Chief Justice. Sorry, John Roberts is in the middle, but he's a very conservative judge. So with regard to Roe versus Wade, and you can't say Roe versus Wade without Casey versus Planned Parenthood, because Casey actually was a limitation on Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade has been limited quite often over a number of years by different cases. So the attack on Roe versus Wade didn't just start this year. It started,
Hmm.
when in 1970. It started in 1973, I think, when the 74, I think, when the case was first came about. It was the judicial way of saying a woman's body is a part of that right to privacy, that she gets to choose the way what her body reacts to with regard to her own medical care. And then they limited the woman's right to choose. Right. So let's look at we have to when we look at Roe, we have to look at there's governmental limits in Roe. The government is intruding upon a woman's body in Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood. So we're not talking about ultimate freedom of choice for women. Roe versus Wade is an example of the court saying there's a limit, but here's the limit. What what Dodd did, which is the case that came about in 2022, is say, you know what, we're going to leave these limits up to the states. We're taking away that that ruling, and we're saying every state can choose how the government intercedes into a woman's health care when it comes to pregnancy. And what it alluded to is that the Supreme Court was open to the idea of government also interjecting themselves into contraception and other rights to privacy and your own bodily autonomy. So that's the problem where we're at, and the way we got here. And it's no mystery how we got here. We got here because the last president was able to appoint three justices. The president before was only able to appoint two that replaced two liberal justices. There was no turnover on what President Obama was able to do. He appointed justices that had pretty much the same position. But former President Trump was able to appoint justices to turn the court into what we call a 6-3 court. Now, in my lifetime, we've never had a 6-3 court. It's always been a kind of a 5-4 conservative court, with the fifth person being, it used to be Justice Kennedy, but that's a whole other conversation about why Justice Kennedy is
Right.
there, why it's not there. But I really I wanted to set that background to make sure that we understand that Roe versus Wade as a platform case, as a seminal case, as far as freedom for women, was still a limiting case. It still limited
hmm
a woman's right to, you can't get an abortion whenever you want in America, even with Roe versus Wade. But
Right.
this Supreme Court decided it wasn't based upon good law, and they decided that because of it was a new standard that was placed upon us. Because what we used to talk about was scrutiny, right? How the level that the government had to prove go beyond in order to interfere in your own liberty in your own life. Now,
Right, because was it not based on privacy?
yes,
Is that how it, yes.
right. So when we talk about in the seminal case with regard to privacy is Griswold v. Connecticut, and then all other cases, including Roe versus Wade, Casey versus Planned Parenthood, Texas v. Lawrence, includes LGBTQ rights, and other privacy rights, are all based upon Griswold versus Connecticut. So when we talk about Supreme Court and law, the attack on Roe versus Wade through Dodd and the opinion that they're from is actually an attack on Griswold, our right to privacy, and how they're going to redefine privacy in these next few years. They're going to redefine it, meaning they're going to redefine it in the sense that the government can intercede into your own right to bodily autonomy more than you think they can, than you thought they could.
Okay. All right. So, thank you for that great kind of background there on that. Now, I know that you also had an opportunity to have your first Twitter space, which was phenomenal. And it was kind of triggered by your following a case, a very current case. And I would like for you to tell us a little bit about that and why you were drawn to it.
Well,
Because I think, it kind of pulls on your background and some of the reasons that you went into law and some of the areas of law that, you worked and practiced in.
so I got into law by accident, but my focus was domestic violence prevention. I worked a lot with a lot of domestic violence victims. I prosecuted a lot of domestic violence cases. I was one of the most successful domestic violence prosecutors in the state of California at one time. And I was, the Department of Justice asked me to teach prosecutors around the country how to do these cases because I was so successful. Not just getting victims to testify on their own behalf, but winning cases when it almost wasn't in their best interest to do so. So, why I say that is because I looked at the People versus Daystar Peterson, otherwise known as Tory Lanez case, as a domestic violence case. I looked through that lens because it's a violence against women case. He was accused of shooting a gun and it injuring a person named Megan Pete, but she's artistically known as Megan the Stallion. I'm not a particular fan of I have two daughters. I don't play Megan the Stallion's music in my house. I don't,
Right?
I barely know who Tory Lanez is. I've never heard one song. If you played a Tory Lanez song, I wouldn't even know who he is. So I don't, I didn't, I never got into the minutia of the characters. What drew me to the case was the amount of initial vitriol and disdain that was placed upon the young lady Megan Pete or Megan the Stallion that was shot. So to me, it's like some guy is accused of shooting a gun, and he hit this lady. Now, it's important that we understand that he wasn't accused of attempted murder, right? So he didn't shoot.
Right.
So when people say he, sometimes I've even made the mistake, like he didn't shoot at her. If he shot at her, that would be attempted murder. He shot a gun, and
Mm-hmm.
Some bullets landed on the ground and broke apart, or they landed on something and hit her feet. So he was shooting at the ground while she was outside of a car after a party in LA 2 years ago. Um, I started making these comments and started getting a lot of like hate mail. Like, honestly,
They'll come for you quick, won't they?
uh, to the point where I had to put like, hey, I've tried 90 plus trials, state and federal, court in my profile, because I'm like, hey, be careful who you're talking. I want to let you know who you're talking to when I talk about evidence. Now, I don't care what happened in the party. I don't care that she was. I didn't really care whether. I didn't really care whether she had sex with the guy. It didn't really matter. What the state had to prove was, did the dude shoot a gun and was somebody hurt? That's it. And it became this whole big thing, and it reminded me, as I talked to some of our other friends, our cohorts, in the collective group of people. It's not a collective as a noun. It's a collective group of people. More
Mm-hmm.
more of a pronoun, actually. Well, not a pronoun, but more of an adjective. But as I talk to people, I started to realize that there's this thing with black women when they're hurt, that we place blame on them for being hurt. When they're physically hurt by like somebody, it doesn't even have to be a black man. It's like anybody.
Like, what did you do?
What did you do to deserve this? I saw the same treatment of someone I hold dearly. I used to work for Kamala Harris, so I saw it's a similar treatment to her. She's castigated, and almost to the point where she couldn't even like embellish, not embellish, but she couldn't even embrace the fact that she was a prosecutor that kept the community safe. Now, my grandmother lived in Sobrani Park in Oakland, which is a very dangerous neighborhood, and all she wanted to do was be safe there. She didn't care about whether knuckleheads went to jail or not that were like trying to break into her house, and neither did I. Those knuckleheads need to go to jail. But when you have a black
Right.
woman that's a prosecutor that's putting the knuckleheads in jail, and so that black kids can go to school without having to cross gang territory, three different gang territories, or a black woman being shot by a dude, and like she should like protect the dude, like that's crazy to me. So I was drawn to the case for all those reasons, but I didn't, but even though my emotions were like, I'm like, protect the woman, I still stuck to like, what I heard of evidence. And it was hard to find. It was,
The law.
it was, no, I knew the law because I knew like, hey, look, I did California law. So I knew CalCrim 875 and 97. I knew what the prosecution had to prove. I knew what all these people were talking about. It had nothing to do with what they had to prove. But, all this other stuff was happening. If you look at my timeline on MG squared, or at MG squared on Twitter, all I do is talk about the law as it applies to the facts, or the facts as they apply to the law. I don't get involved in the minutia. I just talk about the law and what
Mm-hmm.
I thought about the defense attorney, who I think did a terrible job for his client. Honestly, I can have a whole conversation about the mistakes I mean, you can't call a witness that says your client is firing everywhere when you're charged with assault with a deadly weapon, which means you're firing everywhere. I mean, like this, I mean,
Kind of what he was charged with, huh?
he's charged with it, and then somebody got hurt, and like she didn't even have to get hurt, but she did actually get hurt, and a lot of people are missing this too. He wasn't just found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, albeit a firearm. It was found true by the jury in count one that he used the firearm, which is called a 12022.5, which has a sentencing range of 3, 4, or 10 years. But it was also found true that he inflicted great bodily injury, which is 12022.7, which is another 3 to 6 years. So what he's facing is at least 7 years. And in California, when you have this, it's called a strike conviction. You have to do 85% of that. It's not 50. It's not half time, good time. That's at least 7 years. But then remember, he has these aggravating factors too. Like, not even in his whole life, just since he was charged, he
Right.
assaulted two people. He was put on house arrest because he kept on violating the judge's rulings. The judge had to do a restraining order to protect Megan the Stallion because he jumped up on stage a year ago when he was told not to. So it's hard, it's going to be hard to at the sentencing hearing, which I think is going to be continued. I think they have to put on a whole case. I think they have to do like a whole case for him. Um, but um, I mean, he's at least 7, but it's probably going to be 10 to 17 years. It's not going to be 22. It's not going to be maxed out. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
nobody gets really maxed out. Like actually, even in the most egregious crimes in California, you don't get really maxed out. So when people say he's facing a max of 22 to 24 years, that's not going to happen. 10 or 17 is going to happen, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
thing that got me is that our community, the black community at least, and the people I engage with, don't know about the law. Number one, they don't know about what reasonable doubt is, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
you have these people, these false people that are coming online and saying this crazy stuff. Like, he had this guy, Lawyers for Workers, that like, on his own accord, got on TV and started talking about the case. And I'm like, me and this other, attorney, black attorney, named CJ Lawrence was just like, this guy's nuts. He's not even, I mean, yeah, I mean, if and like, hey, you don't, and I always tell this on Democracy First, and I've told this to you. Ask your lawyer friend, like, tell them what I said, and say like, hey, my friend Mark said like A, B, and C. If they think I'm wrong, like, I have no problem having that discussion. Most of the time, most of the people I talk to, they know, like, like, hey, Mark doesn't really, he doesn't say shit he doesn't know about. And like, I'm not,
Right.
and also I'm going to be fair. I was fair to the defendant, to Daystar Peterson. I wasn't like, I said, hey man, I can see a hang on count one, but he's going to be guilty of count two and three. That's what I thought. But once they
Mm-hmm.
once they asked the question about a particular jury instruction, I knew it was going to be guilty though. They asked about the intent, like what does willful mean and what does on purpose mean, which is the explanation in what I refer to as the jury instruction in CalCrim 875. Now, I had people arguing with me about like this case, and I'm like, man, I've done this case before, and it's
Right. Yeah, meaning that you've done like your domestic violence, that kind of thing. And I know that that was one of the things we had, that space that you had, the conversation that we had. It was wonderful, and went in kind of some unexpected ways, because I think what it drew attention to was the fact that, like, you talked about. How just people in general were discussing the case, and commenting on it. And then you also kind of alluded to how maybe, not media per se, but some, like social, media influencers and that, discussing the case as well. And like, Vice President Kamala Harris, who is a black woman. And what I gathered from that conversation that we had that evening was that we have this attitude of patriarchy that, flourishes through, a lot of conversations. And I even heard one person, kind of talk about friends that she had, male friends, who she would not have thought them to be, misogynistic, but their opinions about that case, and the opinions they were making about Megan, Meg the Stallion, kind of revealed that. And I think that it also triggered something in me, because another, person spoke, and they talked about, how prevalent, unfortunately, domestic violence is in our community, and how people, even those who are victims, um, sometimes seek to protect those who are, offending. And I'd like for you to, kind of talk a little bit about that, if you would.
yeah. So like,
You know,
and it's important, and I'm glad you brought up Vice President Kamala Harris, because her background has always been. I don't believe she did murder cases. Her background is, she did some of the toughest cases there are. She did child molestation cases, assault, rape cases. The toughest cases. Rape cases they're very rarely prosecuted. They're very hard because of the different. I mean, the different way. It's hard to prove when it's just two people, right? And you have to take one person's word over the other. Like he, I said no, he raped me, right? Like it's just very difficult. And also her background as a DA is very strong on domestic violence and protection of women. And it's not a surprise that she's the vice president to Joe Biden, who wrote the Violence Against Women Act. Um,
Exactly. Right.
right, I was actually on we call it VAWA, right? I was on a VAWA grant a lot. Actually, my job was a VAWA grant. That's actually kind of funny. But in domestic violence cases, in these type of cases, a lot of people were saying there's no evidence, right? And when someone testifies and they're recalcitrant, meaning they recant their original statement, the evidence code in not just federally but across the country allows you to use their prior statement to what is called impeach their testimony, because you believe that for whatever reason they're motivated to not tell the truth on the stand now, and they were telling the truth before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, so from an evidentiary standpoint, this case had a lot. Well, you had, and just let me just let me be pure prosecutor here. You had two witnesses that disappeared on the prosecution, and hey, the prosecution had every motive to have those people appear. The defense did not.
Mm-hmm.
I can't call it a fact, but I'm pretty sure that the defendant has something to do with those witnesses disappearing, and I think the jury knew that. I think the jury also
Mm-hmm.
knew that the best friend of Megan Pete, Kelsey, was not telling the truth on the stand. She was being very performative. As a matter of fact, she was more emotional than Megan Pete was. I think they believed Megan the Stallion. I mean, and from what I read about her testimony, she was very honest about it. I mean, when she said, "I wish he'd have just killed me," and I think that when she said that, it resonated because that resonated with so many victims of domestic violence. I wish he'd have just killed
Right.
me. I'd rather be dead than be
Because
on the
it's
stand.
like she was being re-victimized,
Yes,
just having to have her assailant,
and also
get
having to reveal who she had sex with. Like she
right,
doesn't want to
right.
talk. Why does she have to talk about her sex life? She got shot.
Why is it even relevant? But this happens to women over and over again. It's not new, but it's sad that in 2022, it still remains so, even though we know that that's a
and
problem.
and, and like if you want to extrapolate that, if you look at rape cases and you separate all rape cases and just focus on black women, the least reported, the most the most happening. Black women are,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the reason why the Department of Justice work I did was training the police officers to recognize abuse, especially with
Mm-hmm.
women of color, because they didn't take it seriously. Like it's almost like, hey, you're black, you can do it, you can hang in there.
We're tough, right? Yeah, we're strong. That's the thing, we're strong, and
And to re-educate the law enforcement approach to that, and also which is and this is literally what Kamala was trying to do, and say like, hey man, it starts in the home. I'm focusing on the home, and that's why no matter whether I disagree with some of the policies or not, what her focus was the black home, the black family,
mm-hmm.
and the black community. And what she thought was, if I can keep the black community safe, all communities are going to be safe, from a legal standpoint.
Right. And we had talked about this a little bit before, how this is such a prevalent thing within the black community. And I feel, and someone else in your space that night said it, and I was so glad that they said it, that I feel that the reluctance for people in the black community to deal with this, to seek justice for it, has vestiges from slavery, like that, staying silent kind of thing, sweeping things under the rug, not dealing with them. And this, like we can have many conversations about this, and I hope that we do. About, that's part of what, again, advocacy arena is about. I hope to have conversations with people regarding, some mental health things, because I feel that, just like, our being victimized and not reporting it, actually wanting to be safe in our communities, yet knowing that oftentimes it is, black and brown people who suffer a lot of police brutality and these types of things. So you have this thing that you have to weigh when you're in trouble. And you need the police to do what the police are supposed to do, protect and serve, and they come into your community, you want to be safe, but you know that there is oftentimes these incidents of bias and prejudice that cause the police to act in very harmful ways to people who should be, yes, they should be restrained, maybe even, incarcerated or taken, but oftentimes these people end up dead, or other awful things. So the trauma, like, just is compounded over and over. So these things are going through victims' heads when they're in our community over things like that. And um,
Yep.
what's your thoughts on that? How do we begin to kind of address some of these things?
Well, it's not, snitch mentality is not germane just to black community. There's like, nobody, the snitch thing is like a generational thing. I mean,
It's a communal thing.
yeah,
It's
it's
community.
white
Yeah,
people too. Like, like the mafia.
right.
Remember the mafia? Like you're a snitch.
Exactly. That's it.
You're a
Hmm.
dirty rat. You rat, right? So it's
Right.
not just black people. And
Yeah.
also, I reject black on black crime, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So I don't want to.
I mean,
I
it's
reject
it's
that as a
community.
concept. It makes no sense because
Hmm.
otherwise, why don't you say white on white crime then? Like, or
Right.
brown on brown crime, or like, Asian on Asian crime, because crime is it's monolithic. So like,
Hmm.
people commit crimes around people they live with. Like,
Hmm.
whomever broke into your house probably is in your neighborhood. They didn't
Hmm.
come from anywhere else.
Right.
That's general though. I'm just saying that. So
Hmm. Right.
that's just that. But um, violence against women is it's something that's God. It has so much to do with who we are as a country and where in our laws, and um, it's not just limited to black women, right? So
Hmm.
I've seen cases, and I had to be very careful not to talk about this actual case. I've seen cases where a CEO of a corporation was a victim of domestic violence. She was like being very badly battered, and no one knew about it until like it got really bad. So I've seen cases where senators' daughters were being battered, U.S. senators'
Hmm.
daughters that needed that like we had to work with. So there's it's not racial. It's not it's not class. It's just something that's ingrained in our society, where
Would you say that that's the
it's,
patriarchal aspects of it?
well, it's not just patriarchal. It's there's a bit of misogyny in there, and also value,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't hit people you value. You don't hurt people you value. You don't hurt people you love. I know people want to say like there's like I think Lenore Walker in 1973 she made the wheel she made the domestic violence wheel. There's this like
Mm-hmm.
always this wheel. Her name was Lenore Walker in the 19, I think it's 73. She made this wheel. It's like the honeymoon phase, then the violence, recovery, and like honeymoon phase again. And she had all these things. If you look it up, you can see all these little things. I'm so sorry. I love you.
Mm-hmm.
And then also like it also has to do with like I can never live without you. But then I can never live without you. The thing that comes next after I can never live without you says if I can't live
Is
with you, nobody
that
can.
no one?
Right. So you got to be
Right.
careful about those. You know, those word tracks are like kind of scary to me. Like, you know, I've had my little sister was in some relationships where someone said, I can't live without you." I'm like, whoa, like, you know, that's not romantic.
Mm,
Um, and she's
exactly.
like, "Stop
It's
thinking like
not
a
the
prosecutor."
romantic state. No, but I'm so glad that she has you because I mean, being myself, the victim of assault, and as a child, experience domestic violence in my home and in the community. It just like I said, I just feel that some of these cycles need to be broken, and I feel like starting to have the conversation is the beginning of that. I don't know that any of us had, I asked you the question, but I know it's not like a simple solution to
No, no, it's not.
such a.
It's about
Mm-hmm.
education and also talking about it like we're doing right now. But you know, and
Mm-hmm.
like you, I think that's probably why we bond so much. You know, I witnessed, you know, my mom getting assaulted by my father, like, you know, when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't understand. I still can't understand. Like, you know, my father had two beautiful boys and a beautiful girl who were athletes, who were scholars. I mean, I was like, you know, I mean, I went, I went to a naval academy for a year. I did it. You know, he had an exceptional family, but he still resorted to violence and brutality with regard to my mother. And you know, in some instances, I thought that I was prosecuting my dad when I was prosecuting these cases, and that was very emotionally tolling to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that hit with regard to the Megan Thee Stallion cases, I saw some of these same dudes. I saw the same mentality. It was consistent with what I grew up with. This misogynistic, and misogyny is like the good word. I don't really like
Mm-hmm.
using these words, but misogyny is a good word to call it because I saw it consistently with regard to her just saying I was shot and this dude shot me. And then
Mm-hmm.
people say that that's not evidence. Well, it is evidence. That's like actually the best evidence there is in life.
Right.
There's
It happened.
there's no better evidence than a witness that says I got shot and that that guy right there shot me. But I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. They're like no DNA. And here's the thing. And here's the thing. This is actually the funniest part and the irony that we're together and all of us are together because I have all these things. I mean, the case happened in California, so I can't help that.
Mhm.
And I used to work for the judge, so like
Right?
I know how
I
he
mean, I
thinks.
know. It's
But I
yes.
also cross-examined the defense DNA expert in a case where it was all based on DNA, and I won the case based upon DNA. So I knew that when he testified, I didn't. His name is Mark Taylor, and I was like, Mark Taylor. I remember Mark Taylor. So I had to go look up in my. I had to get my thumb drive. I got my thumb drive.
So no, let me look for
No,
this
this
name.
this is the this has everything on it. All my
Oh.
briefs. I got the thumb drive off, and I was like, you know, let me, you know, let me look at what this dude said. Now he's not a bad DNA guy, but when he testified, he just said, "Hey, if he fired the gun, you know, 5 times, I'd expect it to be conclusive." Well, the gun was fired 5 times though. He didn't say so. So there's like, you know, in DNA when you have a mixture interpretation. I'm not going to get too far down the rabbit hole of DNA, right? I can actually do a lecture on DNA,
Okay.
but I'm saying that when you have a mixture interpretation a guy saying, "Well, if he had fired it 5 times, I'd expect it to be conclusive. He'd be on that." Well, that's like in a vacuum, right? He's saying like in when I test if I fire the gun 5 times in a control room, I'm going to have my DNA on there. That's not mixture interpretation. It's not saying anything about how the gun was manipulated or moved or who touched it, wiped down, whatever. You always have
Right.
mixtures on guns in almost every criminal case. There's always a mixture of DNA. If you have a DNA case, and the DNA, the case that I won, the case that I won, it was all DNA. I mean, you know, it was just DNA. But but he didn't say anything about a major profile, a major contributor though. That's what I wanted to hear. And but you had all
Mm-hmm.
these people for all these Tory Lanez bloggers talking about there's no DNA. I'm like, that's not what he said. Number one. Number two, it doesn't matter because guess who said they shot him? Meg said he shot me. I don't care if there was
And
DNA.
she was
And
there.
then the
Right.
GSR, people don't understand GSR. GSR does not win cases, does not lose cases. I mean, GSR is just there, like, you know what, it could help you or it doesn't.
Explain. Yeah, it kind of explain a
If you
little
have
bit.
no
Yeah.
GSR on you, then like actually it could help you. If there was a question as to whether you were the shooter, but when someone says you shot me and you have no GSR on you, that doesn't matter, right? So the GSR and the DNA, people just went off on that, and like because of these bloggers like DJ Academics, this Lawyers for Workers, this Say Cheese website, this milligrams, whatever.
Never heard of any of
These
these.
clowns. Well, I just found out about them because people were like, directing me to them, and I was like, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want, and I said I'd be happy to debate with y'all. I'd be happy to, and like when I talked to Kenny, like he's the one that like told me to do that. He's like, "Hey man, you need to do this space." And I wanted to do this space because I was just like, you know what? People need to understand why this happened, and then also what the consequences and the effects are. The effects are a guy got held accountable for hurting a woman. The consequences are is that no wonder Russia was trying to focused on black folks and disinformation and misinformation. No wonder this happened because all these sites got set up over the last 4 years. I never even heard of these sites before. All these bloggers coming out,
Right.
these people are this all happened. Remember, the disinformation, misinformation happened from 2016 on. Not last 4 years, last 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, we were sharing information that was accurate, and then all of a sudden, you got to look shit up now. Like even I do. I'm like, man,
Exactly, and you just can't take people's word. It's like you definitely need receipts. I mean, we've been saying that, but we definitely need to be operating in a world of receipts and reliable resources. And that brings me to an article that you shared with me from someone that I follow on Twitter, Asha, and she that was a great article, by the way. And I
amazing.
bring it up now because you were talking about, like misinformation and disinformation and how, it is proliferating since, the former guy was in office and how, in Democracy First, we talk a lot about, like literally democracy, things that because our democracy is truly under an active attack and it is from within and things like this oftentimes it's not always just direct political things that we need to be centered around or thinking about because this disinformation comes in to the society to start to try to change people's ideas and informations and kind of get them used to and accepting lies, basically setting the stage slowly, changing the narrative, changing what people find acceptable, and getting things that would not otherwise be acceptable brought to acceptability just by it being repeated over and over again in different circles and different places. And that brings me to one of the things that Asha also spoke about in that article was that Meghan Markle, another Meghan, and the Meghan and Harry documentary that is now airing on Netflix, which I watch and I'm now rewatching again because I think it is worth the rewatch because I'm watching it now through this new lens of like really because it was very evident to see that they realized that a narrative had been set about them,
Yep.
particularly her, and they knew that they needed to combat that narrative and create their own narrative. I was so happy because in the beginning, like she said, just as a black woman, it just resonated with me when she said, so many people, have told our story and are telling our story, and I thought it was time that that I tell my story, and I was glad that they took the reins and did that because so
Right.
many, so oftentimes that happens just to our Black history in general. We don't get to tell it, and being that she is a woman, she's Black, and this is her life, and she's being attacked and bullied. And so she took the reins and decided to tell her own story. And I think that documentary went a long way to counter the narrative and to reset the narrative, because you have all these British tabloids, and these people have, labeled her or narcissist, and all sorts of things.
Right.
And she's fighting not only the British tabloid, but the monarchy and their machine, and they have their own, PR and propaganda machine as well. So she's fighting all of these things, and those two things kind of collide. Those stories collide with both Megans. How other
Yeah.
people are, like telling the narrative about these women that is just not true, and how it takes us having conversations like this, telling the truth, and countering those narratives and calling them out. So, I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that, because I wasn't familiar with any of those podcasts. Because, again, I'm kind of like you, being in my 60s, I'm aware of Megan Thee Stallion, but, not so much the music. When she comes on award shows and things like that, or she's in the media, I'm aware. But I would love to hear you kind of speak about that article, or about, disinformation, misinformation, these two Megans, that story a little bit.
Well, I can't help but find parallels between Kamala Harris, Meghan Markle, and Megan Pete, and the way they've been
Hmm.
treated, not necessarily interjecting themselves into public light. They are superstars. Like, whether you
Hmm.
like it or not, they are superstars. They're rock stars. Like Meghan Markle's a princess, right? I
Hmm.
mean, she's a princess.
A real live Black
A real
princess.
life, and well, let's skip to that. That's the problem. White women
Yes.
can't dig a real life Black princess. I mean, that's really the issue when it comes to Meghan Markle.
Hmm.
White people can't grasp a Black woman vice president. White and Black dudes
who is
can't
who is
grasp,
more than qualified,
more than
okay?
qualified, can't grasp the biggest rap star in the game being a woman, and unapologetic, talking about what she wants to talk about, doing what she wants to do,
Right.
using her sexuality to make money like they do, right?
Hmm.
Because don't get me wrong, rappers talk about sexuality all the time.
Right.
The Black rappers do. They talk about all their exploits in their raps. When she does
Hmm.
it, though, it's something different, right? So you have this again. We turn to misogyny, but it's
Yeah,
race,
taking
but
back
it's
the
also a
narrative.
slave mentality too, though. When it comes to the Black
Very
women, though,
much so.
so all of a sudden,
Hmm.
protect Black women becomes something else. Like, I'm jealous of Black women, and
Stay in your place,
and also that's the reason why, hey, look, man, I grew up with this. I seen a dude react to his wife being more successful than him and resorting to violence to put her in her place in my household. So I seen this attitude firsthand, and I know what it looks like. I know what it and I also know what it feels like, and it hurts. Even at 51 years old, it hurts me when I look at my own family and look at my wife and my children, and knowing I would never, I would never. I looked at my, I would never look at her like that. I mean, I would love for her to be more successful than me, like that. I mean, that's great, and
right.
in most ways, she is actually. If I told you what she did and who she worked with, like, you'd be like amazed. But we're the violence part is out. Right. So where violence enters it is because how we were treated historically, right? Um, it's also there's like a bunch of connections. There's a bunch of, like, like I always talk about cases when I look at cases. I always talk about constellations. So I'm
Hmm.
like, even in the in a, like, I'm gonna digress. Even when you look at the People versus Daystar, you look at different points of evidence. Everybody goes like, "Oh my God, Sean Kelly testified that the girl shot first." Like that wasn't the testimony. He said that, but like you got to listen to the whole testimony because he was like talking about. I mean, and from his perspective, there was this movie. I forgot this movie. It was like about this assassination attempt on the president in like Europe, and it like, but it was from different perspectives, and each perspective was totally different, right? And that's how cases are. Like Sean Kelly saw something happening, and he heard gunfire and saw muzzle. He saw flashes. People talked about muzzles on social media. He never said muzzle. He just said flashes, right? So so what I'm saying is that like people when you look at Kamala and you look at the immediate disdain and vitriol that she faced, it's similar to Serena Williams faces the same thing too.
Yes, yes. Like,
And I mean, Katanji Brown Jackson, you're not supposed to be smart. Oh, my daughter brought Mr. Teddy, so like Mr. Teddy's here. Um,
hello.
she brought Mr. Teddy. Um, when you look at Katanji Brown Jackson, the same vitriol. She not, but hey man, these are these are the we are the vitriol. I mean, think about. I mean, sometimes I'm like, how are you feeling, D? When the best of us, the best black women that there are in their game or in their field or doing what they do are faced with this kind of vitriol. What are we? And we support that. Do you support it or do you not? Well, two choices. Do you support it or do you not? But even if you don't, when you look at that, how do you feel? Like, I mean, how do I feel as an average black dude? When I look at like, damn, a vice president, Supreme Court justice, greatest tennis player ever, a princess, aren't good enough for y'all? Well, they're not even trying to be good enough for you. They're not trying to be good for you. That's why you hate them so much.
Right.
That's why you
And it
don't.
is.
That's why you hate them, and you have to write this nasty shit about them being they're a narcissist because they don't fall within your framework. I mean, that article by Politico, trash, trash. Like she doesn't fit. On
And
any logic, she doesn't fit in that article.
right. And to be belittled for wanting to recognizing that you need some help, like you're suffering mentally, and then to be demonized and ridiculed for that.
Who can put
I
up? Who
mean,
can put up? I mean, who can put up with that?
that it to me is it's psychotic. That's crazy.
It is
I mean,
psychotic.
it's like
It's sociopathic.
exactly, exactly. And I'm like, who, I am so glad that they left, that they made that decision to leave together, and everything that they have done since then. I think
And
that they are breaking some cycles,
right,
breaking,
and I'm not giving.
you know,
Yeah, I'm not giving Harry any special. He doesn't get a medal because he's a white dude that supported his wife. He gets a medal because he supported his wife.
mm-hmm.
Like
Exactly.
I don't
He
care
saw
who he
what she
is.
needed. Yes, he addressed her needs, like you said, as a husband to a wife, you
And
know.
here's the crazy part. There is a if we drew a diagram, right? There's a subplot, the connection between Princess Diana and Hillary with Meghan Markle,
Absolutely.
right? When you look at Hillary, if you talk to people that met Hillary, they're like, "That's the sweetest person I ever met in my life." Like my life changed. Like I've
Hmm.
never met anybody that met Hillary Clinton that didn't say the same thing. Like incredibly personable person.
I mean, she started her career working for the Children's Legal Defense
She,
Fund. I
she
mean, this is who she
in
is.
in the political mindset, she had to be. She was tough. She was who she was, but she got creamed to the point where I mean, like, hey, look, man. When the handlers took over, she was crying in New Hampshire, like she broke down. Then she started winning, but like she lost, right? But then, like in 2016, though, like who are these people? What did they know? What I mean, like I'm just like when I go back to 2016 and I'm here now talking to you. Before we started talking, when I was thinking about, I was running today, and I was thinking about the law, and actually, like my wife asked me a contract question. That was it's kind of funny. I was thinking about the law. She's like, "I need a clause."
Nice to have a lawyer handy.
No, 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 a former practitioner, right? But like
Okay.
but she said I need a clause. I was like, okay, honey, here's like here you go. Right, I'm on mile 1.7 on a 5 mile run. I'm giving like my wife like contract clauses. I'm like, how come you don't?
Oh,
How come you don't
wow.
already have this boilerplate? I'm like, how come you don't already have this? She's like, just give me the clause. She's like, just give me the language, man. I didn't ask you why. And like she was very much of a
I don't need all of that.
so I gave it to her. She's like, "Thank you, baby." I was like, "Okay, I gotta finish my run." But um, think about this: the most qualified person in the history of America to run for president. And I was thinking, like, I'm thinking about this case. I'm like, man, if she'd have won, what, I don't even know if me and you would even know each other now.
Right?
I mean, would there even be democracy first? It, I'm looking at the Supreme. I have the Supreme Court justices up right now, so I can like refer to them. Three of them wouldn't be there. It'd be three different people. Roe,
Right.
Roe versus Wade would still be the law of the land. The Voting Rights Act would have passed. I mean, like, there's like a lot. There's like a lot of stuff that would have happened that has not happened because of the consequence of that election, and we're still trying to make up for that. And then we're adding youth and teaching. And like there's people that like some of my students listen to Democracy First when I'm on. They hear adults talking. They hear people talking to me. And in some ways, I have to say stuff I say because I don't want them thinking that when they come to class.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate that, and yeah, we're gonna start to get to the kind of wrap up.
Sure, sure.
But again, I love this. I hope to do many more with you,
Yeah.
and I am so excited that, like I said, you're my first interview for Advocacy Arena and our discussions
I,
around
I, I am
democracy.
I am honored. I
And
am honored.
but you know, you talked about Hillary Clinton, and I love what you just said. I mean, it's the perfect entry point into our wind down, because that is the kind of conversations that I want to continue to have, because we are at a very dangerous place in our democracy, and there are so many things like the demonization that is going on of women that are in positions of power, whether it be from pop culture influencers, or from our government, the president, vice president, and those things. But we talked about how. Um, Things might have been different, but we are where we are right now. And so that is why I'm so passionate about having the continued discussions that we have around democracy, these cases that are pending before the Supreme Court, what they could mean to our rights, to our democracy. And I just started digging into the Rachel Maddow podcast. I love her because she's a teacher at heart. So
And
even
she's
though
and
she
she's from the Bay
gives the
she's from the Bay
news,
Area, Castro Valley too, by the way, outside of Oakland.
I know. And I just love her because the way that she gives the news to you, she gives you that history and that background. And I started listening to her Ultra podcast, and I think it's very, very significant, and want to have some more conversations around some of these characters, because it's kind of not the first time that we've been here,
No, it's not.
where fascism is on the rise. But it's important that we talk about it. We look at the effects of it on our lives, on our country, And I would like to, like give you an opportunity to just, give us some of your closing thoughts about how you see, like, we had the January 6th committee, uh, which did an excellent job to, lay down in history, the annals of history for us, what happened when this former guy and his minions decided to stop the peaceful transfer of power for the first time in our history. And this is why I love talking to you. I want to continue talking to you about these things because, the law is being, they're using the law like we use, the law. We had wonderful people like Thurgood Marshall who helped to use the law for us to get these rights. And now they are using these laws to take our rights away. And, like, where do we need to be focusing and how do we need to be focusing, because I'm about solutions, um, to try to kind of counter this and to fight back, because we can no longer sit on the sidelines. This is not the time. We can, because silence is complicity at this point.
Correct.
Everybody has to be involved. So I'd just like to get some thoughts around that from you.
Well, a couple of things you made me think of. You mentioned one of my heroes, Thurgood Marshall, and like, um, God, I love Thurgood Marshall because he understood that even though we had the 13th, even though we have the Bill of Rights and the United States Constitution, we weren't mentioned in them, right? Like our existence. Like when I talk about my existence as an American citizen, it wasn't. It's not as an originalist. The 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment to the Constitution are why we're able to be here. So when we talk about the makeup of the Supreme Court, you're talking about how my existence can be interpreted one way or another, depending on the case, and how rights that are construed by the same Constitution that gives everybody else rights that were only guaranteed by three amendments to me can be either limited or expanded. Thurgood Marshall only argued separate but equal. Think about his argument. He had to argue for 1 hour and 37 minutes about separate being inherently unequal to overturn partially 1896's Plessy versus Ferguson and just to obliterate 1857's Dred Scott versus Sanford. So, a lot of these cases that we hold on to, they're partial. They're partial resolutions. We have to keep on going. It 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 didn't stop with the civil rights movement is still going on because as much as the force of change happened 50 years ago, there was always been a force of unchange and sustainability with regard to the way things were. Make America Great Again is about that. That's the movement about making America great before 1954 so you don't have to go to school with these black dudes and gals. That's what that shit is for, legally. Like, it's not even a secret. And, like, you see them coming out the woodwork. But, like, from a constitutional perspective, look at, if you, I would challenge everybody that listens to this to listen to Thurgood Marshall's argument. You can Google it. Thurgood Marshall argues Brown versus Board of Education. He's a very succinct and like clear person, and all he's arguing is make things equal. Like so that I can go and I can go shop at Woolworths and dine at the same place white people do,
And not have to go through the back door
and I have to go
or,
through the back door and
eat
all
in a
like
corner.
Jesse Owens had to do at his own celebration in New York after he won the gold medal for America. Right? Or like
Right.
my grandfather that came back from World War II having to leave Monroe, Louisiana because he saw a dude hanged and like go to California. Um, this is all personal for us. And then when you look at it constitutionally, it becomes more personal and you understand why a little a little kid from Oakland that, had a thing for the law became the top constitutional law guy in his class because it was personal, right? And then you move forward with all these arguments and all these little. You look at the little things that happened to Native Americans. You look at these little bites they're taking off of our rights. The Voting Rights Act not being passed, not being renewed, and then what Shelby County did, and then we can look at Shelby County, we can look at all Citizens United, all these cases that happened in the Supreme Court mean something because of the makeup of the Supreme Court. And how the makeup of the Supreme Court was determined was because of the way people voted. That's why
There you go.
you're important with Advocacy Arena. That's why it's important that people start to really dig into voting, right? Just you vote local, and all politics is local, but the way why we're in this boat right now is because people didn't vote 20 years ago and 16 years ago and 12 years ago and 8 years ago and 4 years ago, and now it's so close because you're not voting. So you got to get out and vote. And then also these things need to change, that these little things need to change. It's going to take a while to, I'm not even sure in my lifetime we can change the makeup of the Supreme Court. Probably in my lifetime, Justice Justice Clarence Thomas is probably not going to be on for the rest of my life. I'm not wishing any death on him, but I'm saying he's not going to make it 20 years from now, right? Um, but that's a 5-4 court if he decides to step down, right? It was
Right.
so big. The loss in 2016 was so big, it was generational. So now what we have to do is we have to have a strong Congress, an Article 1. There's a reason why Article 1 is the legislature. Article 2 is the executive branch, the president. Article 3 is judiciary. The founding fathers thought about the legislature first because they represent the people. Remember, it was a compromise to make it a bicameral, Congress,
Mm-hmm.
Senate, and
Right.
and so these local elections, this George Santos dude, like, how the fuck did he? Who was his opponent? Right? That's a rhetorical question. Like, did you not know this? Like, dude, dude said he was black 2 years ago,
I'm
and I
I'm like, where
like,
was the opposition
where's
research?
who did you? He said he had a black father and a white mother, and now he's Jewish. I'm like, and then he said he graduated from Brooke College. I'm like, did you check anything? Like, did you know who you're running against? Like, I could just basically say like I was like, hey man, I'm literally Tom Hanks, and I'm running for office.
I mean, really, at this point, any of us could. We could just make up,
But
our story from whole cloth,
but,
and this is where we are.
but my closing remarks would be in this sense is that we've been complacent about our democracy. We've been too complacent, and in some cases, we've been too marginalized with regard to how we want our democracy to fit us. There's general and then there's specific, right? So you have to have democracy in order for you to fit. There's things that we want. There's black people want a lot of stuff, right? We want reparations, but you can't get reparations unless you have democracy,
Okay?
and you can't, and you surely can't get reparations unless you got to vote, right? Matter of fact, they won't even vote to look at it. They have never done that in 50 years. The honorable gentleman from Detroit uh, proposed reparations study for 40 years and never got it. And so,
Right.
so the first thing that we have to do, and I'm being like my uncle from the Thanksgiving table. I hate doing this, but we have to love the fact that we're in a democracy and we're able to do these things, right? Like like not be like, hey, they won't give us stuff. Like, well, you have to love that you're in a democracy where you can even say that. Because look at the world. Look
Right.
at the world, right?
I mean, and
And then like know how do you get the things you want? Is it federal? Is it state? Or is it local? Right? If you want your property taxes reduced, don't blame President Biden. Right?
that's a local issue.
So that's my closing. All right, and also like pay attention to D on Twitter, and like, hey, like if you want to hear some stuff, like
Thank
if
you.
you want to hear some stuff, like about the kind. I Sometimes I'm funny, sometimes I'm not, but like, I'm a big nerd most of the time. I'm just like making these comments randomly. I liked getting involved in the. I told you I was going to get like ghetto and get involved in the Tory Lanez because I didn't know it was going to get all serious. Like I didn't know I was going to be that serious. I honestly did. I remember I told you, I said, hey, like, don't. I know I've been talking about the Constitution, but I'm about to get involved in this Tory Lanez case. I was actually, like thinking it was going to be like, kind of fun banter, but I was like, whoa, this shit is serious because
It
these black,
pulled up a scab, didn't it?
well, not just that, but like these black people are being like, led astray, being bamboozled and being
Hmm.
hoodwinked by this force that was coming at her, and I still don't understand it. And I don't think it's my place to, I think there's more to be discovered about it, but I don't understand. But I knew it was similar to stuff I felt before, and it was similar to
Hmm.
how it came after Kamala. It was similar to how these people were coming after Meghan Markle. There's different people. White ladies do not like Meghan Markle. Black,
Right.
like for some reason, some people don't like VP Harris because who she is, and
Hmm.
knowing her personally, I don't understand that as a closing argument, and because nobody knows her, and if you knew her, you'd be like, damn, she's hella cool, like Hillary, and
Right.
then and then
Glad she's on our team.
well, the same with Serena, and like I mentioned, I brought in Serena because I'm like, man, and I'm sure there's countless others. I'm sure there's countless others, and I'm sure you probably have your own story. And like I know women in leadership face these obstacles, especially Black women in leadership. And I can tell you this, man. And I know we can go on for like 3 hours, but we're not gonna go on for 3 hours. I literally, whenever I've been in a leadership position, I've always surrounded myself by, if I was chosen to be such, I surrounded myself by women, and even more specifically Black women, because I needed that support, and I've served Black women who have been in superior positions, and I was their support, unapologetically, unequivocally, and trying to do the best that I could for them. So that's my story.
Well, thank you. And I am so glad that you support this Black woman. And I am so glad that you have agreed to come here and talk to us here in Advocacy Arena. And as I said, I hope it's the first of many conversations that we get to have. And I want to bid you good evening. And I will be talking to you again soon. And
Absolutely.
I look forward. Yeah, I look forward to sharing this once I get it uploaded, and
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
bringing more people. Yeah, bringing more people to the party. So,
It's
um,
my pleasure.
have a good evening.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. I appreciate you, D.
All right. Likewise, thank you, and I'm going to close this out now, and we'll talk again soon. Okay.
Okay.